And we're rolling. So, and the Warner Brothers logo morphs into the bat symbol. So the funny thing is, if you've ever been to Mr. Gatti's, Joel Schumacher film, if you've ever been to Mr. Gatti's, like the really good ones, these impressive CG credit sequences, which were a fair novelty back then. Anyway, Mr. Gatti's, the big expensive one, like the party center, it had a movie theater in it, or it had a giant screen you could watch movies in. Anyway, for whatever reason, two movies that they always had playing on repeat were Batman and Robin or Batman Forever. And I am here to review Batman Forever. So right now, like a huge stylistic departure from Tim Burton. We get this montage of Batman gearing up, and it's not the worst thing ever. Like, it's one of those things where I can kind of pretend and see, like, okay, if I had never seen these before and I was seeing this for the first time, I could think, okay, this looks pretty cool. And, you know, I've ripped on the Joel Schumacher Batman stuff for forever. I just realized I made that pun. But I've been seeing so many retrospectives and whatever, and what with his passing, rest in peace, I thought it's time to revisit. So right off the bat, we get a big action scene. And that's something that they repeat in that one. And kind of funny, they would repeat in both the second two Chris Nolan sequels. Huge difference between this movie and the Tim Burton stuff is the colors. It kind of feels like Blade Runner with like a fruity margarita. And Billy D. Williams was going to be Two-Face, but we get Tommy Lee Jones instead. The thing that kind of kills me is there could have been potential for his character in this. Like, a running thing could have been that Tommy Lee Jones, like, Two-Face and Harvey Dent are at odds with one another, and what Two-Face wants is a way to eliminate that conscience that's plaguing him, which is Harvey. And Riddler's like, hey, I could do that for you. But, you know, I don't know if Tommy Lee Jones knew how to be in a comic book movie. I think Kevin Smith and Mark Bernardin both said it pretty well. He just saw what Jack Nicholson did and was like, I'll ratchet up to 100. The style of this movie is... it's not one of its weaknesses. I could see an alternate world. Okay, that shot looked kind of bad. So, for whatever reason, Nicole Kidman is in this movie. And if we're being completely honest, it was just so Batman could have a love interest. And this is... so the 90s Batman movies, they had the same problem that the Karate Kid movies had. They always had to have a new love interest. It's like, we've got to see him fall for another chick again. We can't have him, like, a relationship progress to any degree. And You got to wonder if Christopher Nolan was conscious of this at all. Like, this chemistry between the two of them feels so forced. And this might have been her highest profile gig at this point, but I don't know. She does the best she can with this, and a year or two ago, I would have blamed Joel Schumacher, but as I do more research, I can't help but feel that Akiva Goldsman is the writer. He did A Beautiful Mind, and A Beautiful Mind this isn't. And I really have to wonder how much Tim Burton produced this, or if it was just Warner Brothers throwing him a bone like, hey, we derailed your vision, so the least we can do is give you a credit and a paycheck. So, if you were to have seen Joel Schumacher's filmography up until this point, and you were told, okay, he's going to do a Batman movie, there could be cause for excitement, because he's a talented filmmaker. He handles drama, and he did that Kirk Douglas movie where, you know, he plays a normal dude who just loses it. And if I'm being completely honest, this Batman suit looks, I will say it looks superior to the two Michael Keaton movies. There's much said about, you know, the whole bat nipple thing, but I don't see that just yet. I know it exists in the next one with Mr. Freeze, but so far, this outfit looks pretty awesome. So, this is definitely a far cry from the other two Batman movies. You know, say what you will about Joel Schumacher, and maybe this was just purely out of a necessity, but I just saw this great shot using miniatures, and it does make me lament that it's an art form that we've seen fall away. You know, so I'm watching Batman, Val Kilmer, Iceman, he's stuck in an acid-filled chamber, whatever, and the security guy is freaking out. You have to wonder, if you are a security person or cop in Gotham City, you've got to expect these kinds of shenanigans. And if anything, the acid kind of just looks like soda water. I think one of the great things that Tim Burton and Joel Schumacher have in common is the fact that, maybe at least in this case, their work is idiosyncratic. Jeez Louise. Oh, okay. For a moment it seemed like Batman just, you know, let this guy fall to, the security guy in the vat fall to his doom, but okay. The bat grappling hook is pretty rad in this, although improbable. So here's the thing: Chase Meridian, Nicole Kidman's character. Or mid '90s CGI. As far as that goes, well, it looks rough. You can tell people are new to this art form. But going back to Nicole Kidman's character, I could see a version of that working. And I could see it working in the sense of if they kind of went with a Silence of the Lambs sort of Clarice type character. But they really never pursue it in that direction, and it's a real shame that they don't. Again, I don't blame Joel Schumacher, because Warner Brothers was probably had him by the nads and were going to make sure we're not getting anywhere close to Batman Returns, which was infamous for, being so dark and so gross that people were like, that scared my children. So this is a point that Kevin Smith talked about, where there's a scene where they're in the helicopter and he's like, Harvey, you need help. Like, maybe there was a version of this movie where Joel Schumacher did try to inject some humanity, and Warner Brothers was like, we want a kids movie. But this does make me wonder, how much direction did Tommy Lee Jones get? Like, did Joel Schumacher ever say dial it down a bit, or just say crank it up to 100? Again, I will say, from a production standpoint, the Val Kilmer Batman suit doesn't look too bad. Man, we just got to see a CG wide shot, and it kind of looks like a PS2 game. I mean, this is about the same timeline as Fifth Element, but, oh well. And we get Jim Carrey's Riddler. And one of the great things of... So there's this kind of pissing contest between, amongst Batman fans. Of the 90s era, who was better? Val Kilmer, George Clooney, or Michael Keaton? So as I've said before with Michael Keaton, his tenure in those movies, I didn't see him as Batman. But stuff he did later on, where he was hard and grizzled, I'm like, oh yeah, I could totally see him doing stuff. George Clooney, I don't think he got a fair shot. But Val Kilmer, he exudes both the qualities of Batman and Bruce. So I kind of see what they were trying to do with Edward Nygma, aka the Riddler. You get the feeling that he's this guy who wants more out of life, that he wants to transcend his ranks, his origin. That's a relatable human thing. And he's trying to show Bruce this invention, which is some mind projector thing. And he sees this as, this is my shot. And you pick up on the desperation, which is great. And you do see shades of what is to come in his performances in like The Truman Show, and there is humanity in it. And he has this weird kind of hero crush on Bruce Wayne, which he has this weird hero worship, which if I could have imagined a scene prior to this, like had they developed Edward Nygma a bit more, when we get to this moment, it would have meant more. But again, the great thing about Jim Carrey in this movie is you can tell what he's thinking. And we definitely get shades of like the cable guy in this movie. I will say, I think I differ with Kevin Smith on this, but I will say that I think the Elliot Goldenthal music is on par with the Danny Elfman stuff. So it seems they're doing something really interesting. So it appears that during the broad daylight, they used CG for like the wide shots of the city, but at night they'll use miniatures and models. So Chase Meridian just lit the bat signal to lure Batman to a meeting. And it makes you wonder, what is it that she wants? Does she really just want to get it on with Batman? Like, I don't know. It's like you never really feel, what is it that she wants? Oh, I just saw a shot of the bat nipples. But they're much more subdued and not so fixated on in this movie. But I think her character could have been a bit more credible if she wasn't just always walking around in like lingerie. It's like, who does that? I think even Lady Gaga, showed more restraint in her heyday. And she just made an allusion to Catwoman, which, come to think of it, who else but we, the audience, knew that her and Batman were a thing? So we can tell she digs Batman, but she's supposed to be this criminal psychologist, and she's supposed to have an interest in him from that perspective. And we just don't get that from, I mean, I don't know. And we're back to Edward Nygma. Okay, so they're kind of doing what I thought of, except it's in a different order. So, okay, so Edward Nygma Riddler has got his supervisor hooked up to his machine, and he's about to activate it. And you can tell this was supposed to be a weird kids movie because there's such a contrast between the Chris Nolan movies and these, in that this movie doesn't, the mind device, it doesn't look like anything that would function or work. Whereas Chris Nolan, his dream machine in, what is it? Not Interstellar. Inception. It's like, okay, that looks like a sophisticated piece of machinery. But this looks like a blender and like the inside of a TV put together. So as far as origin stories go, we get that, Nygma he had some weird penchant, and okay, he's just going into full Jim Carrey mode. But anyway, we get that, he's kind of out there, and I guess what this whole mind device is supposed to do is unlock his brilliance, or again, this isn't a Nolan film, but I guess what it's supposed to do is activate his neurons and stuff, but there should have been some setup again that he likes to prove that he's more clever, that he has this penchant for cryptography and riddles. Kind of funny, David Fincher, we're going to get to see this in Matt Reeves' Batman movie, but they should have done some kind of, allusion to his cryptography and interest in puzzles and riddles. But from what we get here, the device, it messes with his head, makes him smarter, and then he decides to tell riddles. Like, one of the things that the Joaquin Phoenix Joker movie did so great was they showed he had all these elements which gave him the capacity to be the Joker, but then the gun and the train murder, it was the catalyst that led to his full-blown transformation and metamorphosis. We could have had this, but again, Warner Brothers wanted a kids' film. And there's this real problem that Warner Brothers has where they can't they don't have a consistent pattern in investing in talent. And they can't really seem to learn from... They keep having to learn this lesson over and over again. They'll find somebody cool, then they'll mess with stuff. And, you know, it's really unfair that Joel Schumacher didn't to do his own stuff, or because Tim Burton got to have full reign and do what he wants. But then again, maybe they thought, okay, maybe that's the problem. We can't let people do whatever they want. So Nigma is mourning the loss of the guy he just murdered, and he's saying, he was like a father. And it's like, was he that much older than you? So, okay, there's a little bit of an allusion to sort of the things I mentioned. He gives some demonstration that of being able to forge a letter. And okay, from a filmmaking perspective, they could have cut this scene. I will say this about the movie. So, the riddles that Nigma uses in these movies, they're corny as hell. They don't stand up to scrutiny very well. But I will say this. More so than... Okay, it's about on level with the Adam West Batman. But I will say it is a touch closer to any kind of detective work than what was in the Tim Burton stuff. And geez Louise. So I'm getting kind of Silence of the Lambs, Buffalo Bill vibes as we see the Riddler's lair, where he lives. And so I think he's making some kind of ransom letter or whatever, and they've got this song playing over. In a weird way, the Schumacher films feel like a proto MCU movie okay, and I should clarify that. I'm not saying they're anywhere near as good or like they're from the same mold. It feels like there are contrivances and isms that MCU movies would do. And that the MCU movies do well, but, you know, these Batman movies just don't know how to do. And we just got to see a shot of a relocation, which was the first in the Batman movies. So I guess the whole point we're supposed to see with like Bruce visiting Chase Meridian, hearing some kind of struggle, he bursts through the door and seeing her like practicing on a punching bag, is it's supposed to set up the idea, oh, she could be Batman's girlfriend. Like maybe make us see, oh, there's potential in this relationship. Are we also supposed to get the idea that she has no clue who Bruce Wayne is? And that she's... This is how she should have been behaving towards Batman. Because she seemed like a total horn dog for Batman. But here there is an air of professionality that she needed to have in that. And she's actually looking over that riddle that was left and giving some insight onto it. So this is the function that needed to be established that she serves to the story. And I guess what they're trying to do is set up the idea that like, oh, her and Bruce could wind up together just as well as her and Batman. And so there's going to be this weird pseudo love triangle. So Bruce just looked at a Rorschach painting and he's like, you got a thing for bats? And then she's like, oh, it's a Rorschach. People see what they want. And it might be a Rorschach, but it is pretty intentionally made to look like a bat. Like, this feels like something that Nolan would have done, could have done. Definitely he would have pulled it off better. But, and in a way he kind of did when they put Falcone on this giant light thing and you saw what looked sort of like a bat signal. Again, Nicole Kidman's character got the wrong introduction in this movie. Okay, I guess him asking her on a date and taking her to a circus this is the way that we set up Robin, is him and Robin are going to meet. And again, we get Joel Schumacher's neon Blade Runner shtick going on. Okay, so I get what's going to happen. So if you haven't seen this before, this kind of feels like Tim Burton could have directed this scene. Because it's, again, idiosyncratic. It's colorful, big and bright. But I guess Joel Schumacher's like, you're not the only guy in town that does this stuff. And perhaps Warner Brothers thinking was like, we liked the success of Batman. We want that, but we don't want the nightmare that was Batman Returns. So they're thinking is like, okay, how do we get the best of both worlds? Well, let's find a dude who can do something similar to Tim Burton. And yeah, it's a win-win situation for anyone. So I guess what this scene is supposed to do is serve the function of So I guess this is supposed to further develop Bruce and Chase Meridian's relationship. It introduces Robin, and there was a scene where Edward Nygma was watching this on TV, and of course it shows Bruce, so he's like, a pox on Bruce Wayne. And I think that Two-Face is going to show up and try to, and he's going to wind up killing like Dick Grayson's family. I can't remember. It's been forever since I saw this. I wanted to give this movie a fair shot again. Oh, yep. The ringleader just stepped away. So here comes Two-Face. He's going to drug him. And here's the thing. I don't understand. Why did he try... It feels very Deus Ex Machina that he chooses this moment to... He chooses this scenario to attack Gotham. Well... And here's Tommy Lee Jones going full ham again with Two-Face. You know, he could have done the overtop thing. Okay, so another function that this serves is it shows the Riddler watching Two-Face, and I guess this is his kind of introduction, so it'll be like, okay, this is somebody I want to work with. So we get a villain monologuing. So, okay, we get what Two-Face wants. He wants to kill Batman. But why? I will give Two-Face this credit. He has enough deductive reasoning to say, okay, this circuit has a bunch of rich people, and he's able to deduce Batman needs resources, so he's probably rich. Ergo, he's probably here at this circus. So I guess this scene isn't totally unwarranted, but it's one of those things you really have to think about. So we get to see that the Graysons, they do have a penchant for heroism. They're trying to stop Harvey as best they can. But of course, we all know how this is going to wind up. So I think I've made several allusions to the shooting style, and like the best description I can give of these Joel Schumacher films is it's basically Blade Runner meets Cirque du Soleil. And so we just get a cutaway to Nicole Kidman. She's like, oh my gosh. And it almost felt like a meme level of just, inserted from out of nowhere. Like, and here we see Robin has witnessed the death of his parents. And I'm probably going to... Okay, Chris O'Donnell is a great actor. And again, when he looks down and he sees, like, his family's dead, you buy the emotion that he's delivering. But it really doesn't make sense. Why is he a ward of the state? Because... And why is he being given custody to Batman? Because he does look like a grown man. He doesn't even... It doesn't make sense. Like... Okay, Andrew Garfield in The Amazing Spider-Man, the first one, he was 27. He was at that precipice of he could still pass as a teenager. But Chris O'Donnell, he looks like an adult. So... And he's even saying, like, I'm out of here. And it's like, you look old enough. Yes. And they just said the circus must be halfway to Metropolis by now. They're kind of alluding, like, to a shared universe. And one of the things Kevin Smith pointed out is, like, it's just fodder for the fans to geek out about. Okay, so Robin just, aka Dick Grayson, he just parked his bike in, I guess, Bruce's car garage, and I could swear that this looks straight out of a scene from X-Men. And I guess what they're trying to do is, like, they're trying to kind of contrive a reason for Robin to stay. And I will say it's not terrible stuff. But at the same time, it's like... I just can't get over how old Chris O'Donnell looks. So, again, I haven't seen this movie in forever. Oops, I did it again. But there's a scene where Batman, Bruce, he looked at a family photo, and we get to see a flashback of the night his parents were killed. And I gotta say, like, I buy into this. Like, one has to wonder what would have happened if Joel Schumacher had been the guy who started off Batman. I may have to do like a whole Joel Schumacher viewing party. But I will say, this scene feels like it's in a different movie. And it feels really great. And I want to see more of this. Like, and we're back to the bread and circus world of The Current. Oh wow, 46 minutes. Okay, so I will say this. Val Kilmer's a great actor, but in this moment right here, his acting does feel a little stiff and wooden. Well, I guess enough time has passed that we got to cut to an action scene because the bat signal was just lit. You know, these movies, this one in particular, okay, so this is kind of lame. They're kind of trying to explain why it's called Robin, and it's like, we don't need that. And in fact, okay, there's always going to be a comparison between Tim Burton and Joel Schumacher versus Christopher Nolan, and soon I'm betting Matt Reeves will go into the foray. But Chris Nolan found a way more clever way to slide Robin. That sounded dirtier than I meant it to. He found a much, much more clever way of working Robin into the formula. So, okay, this scene right here, its weakness is definitely the material. Like, it was shot beautifully. I don't think this movie looks bad except for the mid-90s CG. And I can't help but wonder if... what was it? And I cannot help but wonder if, Joel Schumacher saw that Dick Tracy movie that came out a while ago and thought, okay, that's the way you do it. Okay, so there's a chase scene right here. Two-Face has set up a trap and he's trying to kill Batman. And we never really get to see why he wants to kill Batman. I guess he foiled the bank robbery, but this suggests a deeper fixation than just, oh, he foiled my plans. Like, it would have made sense if he was like, if he had saved me, I wouldn't be what I am, but this movie only ever hints at, like, great psychological depth. And the rest of the time it feels like a cartoon, which I'm not against. But this little section here, people have said that these movies feel like toy commercials. But right here, it really feels like a toy commercial. There's going to be a scene, it's coming up, where the Batmobile basically climbs on the side of a building. And here's the thing. I remember seeing this scene as a kid, and I wasn't convinced by it. Like, you can tell there was going to be some toy where they're like, hey, we got to show them the toy the scene, so they'll be like, oh, that's the scene from the movie. And he just heard like a horn and brass section going da da, and okay, so I've been pretty generous so far, but that scene really did nothing to progress the story other than to say that Two-Face really just doesn't like Batman. And again, would have made sense if it was some psychological thing, but we don't get that courtesy. Now, they're doing an interesting thing here where Nigma is trying to create his outfit. He's got some Zoltar thing helping him make his choices, and he's putting an outfit together on like his computer with some pseudo Photoshop. And I don't know. It's kind of interesting, but it's not done as competently as we wish it was. And maybe it's like a decade too early for that. And Drew Barrymore's in this movie because it's the 90s, so why the heck not? Jeez Louise. So they just lit a cigarette that Harvey was smoking, and it was like a blowtorch, and it's like, you have to wonder what the insurance on this movie was like. And this is where the Riddler and Two-Face meet. Something that does puzzle me just a little bit is the whole two villains teaming up thing was kind of introduced in Batman Returns. And Warner Brothers wanted to depart from anything that reeked of Tim Burton. So you kind of have to wonder, why did they use two villains? Okay, so I've criticized this movie for its lack of psychology and stuff, but the Riddler is presenting something interesting to Harvey. He says, you don't want to just kill him, you want to mess with him before you kill him. That way you can savor him more. So I'll give it props where I think it succeeds. This, okay, him talking about the whole, it's so dark and gothic, feels like a slight jab at Tim Burton. And there's at least a couple more of those that are going to happen in this movie. And again, I don't attribute to, well, maybe they're not jabs. If it was a note from Warner Brothers, I would say it was a jab. If it's from Joel Schumacher, I would say put it as like an acknowledgement of like, Something. And of course, there's a scene where he's causing Harvey's two Hinch girls to see images. And they use Looney Tunes because this is Warner Brothers and they have the rights to that. So okay, so they're setting up. It's a heavy exposition scene, and Riddler's saying, "Okay, so Harvey Dent, Tommy Lee Jones, he kind of brings it down from 100 to something more subtle, and we needed more of that." So the whole exposition scene was he gets Riddler to get him the capital to start his company. And what we get is, okay, like, I can give you something that you can't have on your own. Okay. So I heard Kevin Smith talk about the whole martial arts laundry scene, and it's like there could have been better ways to allude to the fact that I think that scene could have been cut. There could have been ways to allude to in the earlier scene before his parents got killed. He could have had him fight a thug and show he has some competency in fighting. That would have been a great way to... Okay, so Two-Face and Riddler, they're now driving, having robbed a jewelry store, and they're wearing the jewelry, and they both kind of look like the weirdest drag queens ever. And... So, okay, if I could have given Joel Schumacher any advice, or if I had been the Warner Brother executive who was working at this time, I would have said, take this in an Alfred Hitchcock direction. Okay, so now Riddler is doing this sort of Steve, like, product presentation of, like, the box. It's the mind reading device that projects images. And okay, honestly, I think if you go back to the Power Rangers movie when Ivan Ooze is selling the ooze, I think that scene works vastly superior. It's concise, it's to the point, and Paul Freeman is like... I will say this, nostalgia aside, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers is a better movie. Like, I'm sorely tempted to download this movie and do a cut of it to see if like you can't make it more interesting. And again, there are ideas in this movie that, had they been changed just a little bit more, this could have worked. But so for this being the Batcave, the security seems pretty weak. So Chris O'Donnell he did a bunch of acrobatic moves into the Batcave, and he's like, oh my gosh, Bruce Wayne is Batman. And somehow Alfred was... Okay, in the time it took Chris O'Donnell to stumble through, Alfred was walking in a different direction. And then when Chris O'Donnell looks around, Alfred is already there, and it's just like, what? Okay, so we've got another Chase Meridian Bruce scene, and he's telling her about his parents' death, and he sees it in his dreams. Again, in another movie, this could have worked. And, okay. Here's an ultimate what if. Like, they should have watched Silence of the Lambs and thought, let's do something like this. Like, So for some reason, he's now upset that he found a whole bunch of Batman-related stuff in her apartment. Like, a bunch of... He's like... Really, the file she has on him looks like the most professional thing. Way more than how she was introduced. Okay, you feel like he wants to tell her, I'm Batman, but, okay, a movie that did this whole, am I going to tell her, am I not going to tell her, and did it way more competently was the 2002 Spider-Man movie. And you don't get, why are they hooking up? Why are they together? Other than the fact that they're two Hollywood actors playing these characters. And that's what people of the time wanted to see. Okay, so Alfred just told Bruce he stole the Batmobile. And again, this feels like something that could have worked in the other car thing seems like it could have been in like a Marvel movie, but done much more competently. I bet you Kevin Feige was watching this thinking like, okay, so we just saw Kevin O'Donnell. He was driving through through Gotham, and the fins were different. And now we see him stopping the Batmobile, and it's a different kind of design. This is an aspect of the movie that feels kind of like a movie by committee. Because it's like, okay, what are the kids like? They like MTV, and like, it feels like, I don't know, they were trying to I don't know, I'm sort of at a loss for words. There's pandering, basically. I guess that's what I'm getting at. So, there's a long-standing rumor that Leonardo DiCaprio was almost Robin. And the producers asked a bunch of kids, who do you think could beat up who? And they said, Chris O'Donnell could beat up Leonardo DiCaprio. And that's how he got the gig. Now, I will say this. I think that Leonardo DiCaprio would have been a much more appropriate choice for Robin. Like, he could have passed for a teenager back then. Right now, this... Okay, so interesting thing. This scene where Robin is taking on these sort of neon painted skull looking weirdos, this feels much more akin to Batman Beyond. And of course, Batman... Okay, there could have been a cool fight scene, but... And Batman flies in and they're like, oh shoot, it's Batman. Okay, so there's contrived drama. Robin just attacked Batman and he's like, if you had been there, my parents would still be alive. But again, executed differently, it could have been done right and it could have been believable, but they didn't put the thought into that. So Bruce and Robin are getting into this whole moral dilemma argument about if it's right to kill Harvey, and is that really going to be what satisfies, Robin's lust for revenge. And it does lead me to believe that there might be a rumor of a Schumacher cut of this movie, but that Warner Brothers interfered again. It almost makes this movie that much more lamentable. The fact that there could be a version of this movie that isn't just good, but great. I will say this. This movie does move along at a pretty brisk pace. So it's funny. So the producers of these movies were like, okay, apparently Kevin Smith said that when he was writing his Superman movie, they said, don't do those whole gala things because they're expensive and they cost a lot. And it's like, it's a big budget action superhero movie and you're concerned about that. And I guess here's a scene where, Riddler is having his gala. He's rich now. And then Bruce shows up and kind of steals his thunder. And I guess, they're trying to set up this idea of like, Nigma Tech is doing better than Wayne Tech or whatever. And I feel like this whole thing of like, Nigma trying to top Bruce. I feel like this has been done somewhere in another movie before. And this kind of feels like the most Hitchcockian of aspect of the whole movie. And they really should have honed in on that. So it's funny, they're using this they're trying to show the inside of what Commissioner Gordon is experiencing through this device. And it doesn't look that impressive. It's like, you could do that for under $100 with today's technology. But again, this is the 90s, and how else are we going to show what's going on in someone's mind? So, okay. Okay, so there's this weird mimicking contest between Bruce and Edward. So Nigma looks like he's cosplaying as Bruce, and Bruce takes off his glasses, and Nigma takes off his. This is strange. And the mind control device, okay, I will say this. It looks better than the Blender computer thing, not the editing software. I will say, it looks better, but it looks like, they called up the production crew of Star Trek The Next Generation, said, hey, do you have something we can borrow for the weekend? Like, yeah, sure. Okay. So Bruce just stepped into the chamber where like he's having like some kind of mind trip with Edward Nigma's machine. Whoops. Two-Face baddies show up. He's with one of his other hench girls who kind of looks like she's cosplaying as the lead singer from Evanescence 6 years before. But this is ruining Edward's evil plan, which just happens to save Bruce from the mind control device. And this would have been an interesting moment where he has another episode that flashes back to his psychological issues with his parents. But again, they wasted another opportunity. But if they hadn't done that, then, Bruce wouldn't have been able to suit up and become Batman. And it's been about 10 or 15 minutes since the last action scene. So, we've got to have something happen. And again, they could have had an action scene happen right now in another way, but they just didn't think. Okay, so funny thing. So Nigma just confronted Harvey Two-Face about, why did you attack this? Or why did you attack my event? We could have coordinated. And he drops the most meta line saying, like, we could have gotten the movie rights. And, so, we'll say this. He did a sort of fourth wall break 20-something years before Deadpool. I could see a thing where if they had done Deadpool in the 90s, I could see them getting Jim Carrey. Oh, that would have been funny because both Jim Carrey and Ryan Reynolds are Canadian. So, at least in this movie, I think that the fight scenes are better than what we saw in Tim Burton's Batman movies. And they're better. And that should have translated into the second movie. But for whatever reason, Joel Schumacher didn't remember what worked well. And they just used that Indiana Jones bit. Where, the guy does the fancy knife work, and then Batman just easily, takes care of him. And Chase Meridian just, randomly kissed Batman saying, "My place, midnight." And it's like, it makes you wonder way more about her psychology than it does Batman's. Like, and again, they could have done something interesting with that. They could have been like, she was looking for meaning in her life, and I don't know, so she developed a fixation. They did something like that in Watchmen, and okay, so I guess the whole point is like of this scene. Harvey set up this trap for Batman, and it looks like he's about to kill him. And from what I remember, Robin's going to save him from this, but again, this is another one of those bits that I kind of just, even as a kid, I didn't buy. They just scorched Batman, but he turned on this thing that made his cape flame repellent. Again, I think I said it before, but it's worth mentioning again. If there had been something where, if they had established that, okay, the reason Harvey wants to kill Batman is because he's like, you could have saved me, but you didn't. That would have given so much more weight to the character and his actions. But they didn't even bother to do that. I think one of the most unquestionable aspects of this movie, the movie's quality, is the Elliot Goldenthal score. He has done really great work, especially in Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within. Okay, nerd moment. So Batman and Robin are having this fight about, like, he's basically saying, like, you shouldn't have done hero work, and Robin's like, what, I meant to do this, you do it, why can't I? And he's like saying things like, I need a name, and he drops Nightwing. And so it's like, okay, that's pretty rad. Could he one day be Nightwing? And from what, there was a script called Batman Triumphant. Joel Schumacher wanted to kind of be like, hey, sorry guys, let's have the Batman movie you guys wanted. And apparently in that movie, he was going to become Nightwing. Okay, again, they're getting into the material of, like, where this feels like a different movie. Like, we just went from Cirque du Soleil, Blade Runner, and we're going into the psychological stuff, which, again, okay, so there's this. So I said earlier before, there's kind of a love triangle between Chase Meridian, Batman, and Bruce Wayne. And again, Spider-Man, the 2002 Tobey Maguire one, did this way better. Oh my goodness. I've got like 40 minutes left in this movie. And this is just strange. I think this is a dream sequence. Apparently Batman just went to Nicole Kidman's, like, apartment and they're making out, but it's like, what's he gonna do? Keep the mask on the whole time? This just doesn't. Okay, so they're kind of trying to do the thing they did in Spider-Man, where she's like, I've wanted this. And she's like, but now I realize I want someone else. And, okay, she's going to say it's Bruce Wayne. And of course, Batman's going to be happy about that. But there was nothing that really built up to this. That's the thing. Batman just grinned and, like, it was so awkward. Okay, look. In the Batman and in the DC animated universe, we've seen Batman smile, but it always felt like kind of a smug, self-confident smirk. It felt in line with his character. This didn't. Okay, so Riddler and Two-Face are just about to find out Batman, Bruce Wayne's identity. So they find out he's Batman because they put in this, like, info log of when Bruce's brain was scanned, and there's a bat. So they're like, oh, we know who this guy is now. Okay, so this is kind of a left of field thing. For whatever reason, Batman is deciding, like, okay, I'm not going to be Batman anymore. And apparently it's because he found out, okay, Chase Meridian, she digs me, not Batman. And, okay, this is something they did in Dark Knight, and they executed it so much more better. They set up the idea of Batman not wanting to, but here in this movie, it comes out of nowhere, and Robin's like, oh no, you gotta be Batman. Gotham needs you. There are monsters out there. And they don't really feel like monsters. They feel like clowns. Now, I will say this. Chris O'Donnell, he has way more motivation. He wants to avenge his parents' murder. So I think we're just about to have... Okay, so Chase Meridian, she's just shown up at Wayne Manor. So we're only moments away from Riddler attacking and, yeah, setting up the third act. So Robin is deciding he's going to go, I guess I'm going to get Harvey anyway. Well, I'm kind of surprised I made it so far into this movie. Again, it's kind of a brisk pace, but... Oh, and apparently it's Halloween, so... So here's what I don't get. I don't understand how Warner Brothers could have so royally messed up this movie. Because it's like they had such a pool of talent. They had a great director, they had great actors, great composer, and a great screenwriter. The guy who wrote A Beautiful Mind wrote this script. It just doesn't add up. Like, the story mechanics, like, this character does this, it has this effect on him, and it motivates him, which causes him to do such and such actions. That doesn't seem present in this, and it baffles me because the screenwriter is a great dude, Akiva Goldsman. And so, funny thing that happened, again, it glimpsed, like, what could have been a great movie, because Chase Meridian, or whatever, I almost said Meredith. I think I've been watching too much of The Office. She sets her glass down and accidentally knocks over Rose, and it causes Bruce to flash back to the night his parents were murdered. And immediately goes back to Blade Runner Cirque du Soleil. So right here, I think it's the point of no return, where this movie just totally becomes the 1966 Adam West Batman. And it just goes to show that for this being Batman's lair, it's really easy to get into Wayne Manor. And again, we go back to another flashback where Bruce sees himself holding the journal or whatever, and I think there's a deleted scene, but if I remember correctly, it's not in the theatrical cut. So it's like, why did Warner Brothers allow them to have that material in it in the first place? So, the great thing about these moments where we forget about the camp and the neon lights, when we go into the psychological dark stuff, this feels like the most comic book of any of the Batman movies up until this point. In a way, it's kind of Zack Snyder-ish before Zack Snyder became Zack Snyder. Oh, and they figure out a way to tie in the forever. He's like, I fell forever. This is some really Hitchcockian stuff right here. He's describing, and it's showing, this psychological metamorphosis of when he fell down the cave as a child and when a bat flew towards them. This is some really great stuff, I have to be honest. It doesn't make sense. No, I mean, not that part doesn't make sense. What doesn't make sense is why couldn't the rest of the movie be that way? Oh, and Chase Meridian just found out that Bruce Wayne and Batman are the same person. And just as the Batcave, Wayne Manor is being invaded by Riddler and Two-Face. So I'm going to make an excursion here. So in the Adam West Batman series, there's an episode where Joker breaks into Wayne Manor, and then he gets into a sword fight with Alfred. Alfred basically just, he got knocked out by the Riddler and went out like a sack of potatoes. And I'll give, Joel Schumacher this. He approached the idea of the Batcave being invaded way before Chris Nolan did. But again, contextually, it is different. I have half an hour to what left. So another thing that okay, I've talked a lot about the Riddler, but one thing that Two-Face, he does this thing where he'll make decisions based on like the flip of a coin. They kind of allude to it. They have him flip it, but it doesn't really factor into his decision making. And like right here, Jim Carrey, he's destroying the Batcave, but he's just being all dumb and dumber. I'm not sure which movie came first. and the Batmobile got destroyed. They just made the worst sexual innuendo in... Okay, they made the worst sexual innuendo in any of the Batman movies. Riddler destroyed the Batmobile, and then he said, "Joygasm." And I'd say, even against all the innuendos they do in like Batman and Robin, the one with... Whoa. Okay, so interesting thing that just happened. Bruce fell unconscious, and then Harvey Dent put a gun to his head and was about to shoot him, but Riddler said, "No, don't kill him." And the funny thing is, it's often criticized, like, why don't the bad guys just shoot Bruce Wayne in the head? And again, we're going to another dream sequence. Well, I think we were going to, but they cut away from it. But anyway, so I guess the reasoning we have of why Riddler insisted don't kill him is like, we've got to mess and toy with him. So in a way, I'll give the movie this. There is kind of a rationale for not playing into a common comic book what if of like, why don't they just shoot him in the head? So something they could have done, I think, to lend Jim Carrey's Riddler a bit more thematic heft is they could have taken him in much more of a Buffalo Bill direction, because Buffalo Bill was about camp and theatrics and transformation. Who knows? To be honest, I'm kind of over this to this point. I mean, I've made it like an hour and 40 minutes into it, so I'm just kind of talking at this point. Okay, so I'm going to call this movie out on something. Bruce just only figured out that Edward Enigma and the Riddler are the same guy when there's so much throughout the movie where it's like, it's not difficult to figure out. And we just got a shot of the Batsuit's butt. And okay, so he just had a new suit on, and it doesn't look like the suit has any nipples. So that's a plus. So the funny thing is, there's a lot made about the fact that, X-Men, kind of retooled superhero movies. And there's not a huge amount of time between this and that. And I think an even bigger shocker is the movie Blade came out in 1998. And it did things so much more competently. And we're getting another thing of mid-90s CG. Now, I will say we have this giant long tunnel, which it's been contested doesn't serve any function. And I will say this, perhaps it is to make it less reachable to get into the Batcave. But if that is the case, then how is the Riddler able to get in there so easily? It's, again, probably just looking cool for the sake of it. I think I can say with absolute not being tainted with the veil of nostalgia, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie, was vastly superior to this. Like, now I will say that, so it's superior in the sense that it cost a fraction of the budget that this movie did. And even from a script perspective, it was better. So the great strength that Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie, had against Batman Forever is one sequence of events led into the other. And I'll say this, Ivan Ooze was much more interesting and understandable than either of the villains in Batman Forever. Again, so Batman and Robin are trying to get to Riddler's island hideout that's a giant mind control device. And it's showing... So the Bat boat, I guess, just got destroyed. Again, this is one of those sequences that is basically just a toy commercial. And so the Bat boat got destroyed and Robin's swimming through the water. And the henchmen are under there with like spear guns and like... And apparently the mind control island can shoot lasers. But again, this scene isn't meant to progress the story forward. It's to sell toys. This scene right here where Batman is taking care of like the Riddler's underwater henchmen, it does feel like one of those sort of, some days you just can't get rid of a bomb. Okay, so aesthetically they've copied the Adam West Batman. Now here's where they really pay homage to it with a line that Robin says. Okay, so Robin just went, "Holy rusted metal, Batman," and Batman's like, "Huh?" And Robin's like, "The ground, it's metal and rusty and it's full of holes." Okay, I will say, an hour and 45 minutes into this, the movie became enjoyable. And maybe this movie is from a different era where these kinds of movies were just bread and circus, which maybe the longevity was not something that executives had in mind. Perhaps it was just get butts in seats for this summer, and that's the end game. I mean, at this point, the home video market was really in its infancy. It was about 15 years old, so they probably... Whoops. Robin and Two-Face are getting into it. But was it just an illusion? We don't know yet. So there's an interesting moment where Robin could have let Two-Face die, and Two-Face says, "We're not that different," and he's like, "I'll see you in hell." And then Robin makes the decision to save him. So that's interesting. I mean, but again, it doesn't feel consistent with the rest of the movie. And of course, Two-Face, he pulls a gun on him, and okay, and that was way more interesting than like the Batman thing where he was basically in a death trap, a la the Adam West Batman. And now the big final setup between Riddler and Bruce. So there's a subtlety to Jim Carrey's performance that really only comes up about now towards the end. I guess this is where he feels like he can't lose. So his character gets a level of confidence, and I guess I would have liked to have seen this more throughout the rest of the movie, but I mean, the movie is what it is. Okay, so they're doing something that... So they're doing something that the Spider-Man movie did, but I think Spider-Man obviously did way more competently. They're putting him in this dilemma where he has to choose between saving Robin and the love of his life. It's funny, I kind of can't help but think, like, what did it take to build this secret lair? Like, what did the contracting look like? Commissioning, like, design plans and stuff, and saying, like, okay, I need this much, and our budget is this. I guess one way that the Power Rangers movie is superior is in the fact that they could just explain it away with magic. I can't help but wonder if, like, this is one of those things that Tommy Lee Jones, he will just give somebody the cold shoulder. If you're like, so, Batman Forever, he'd probably be like, get the hell out of here. Okay, so this is not a totally terrible climax. Batman just activated his night vision. He took out a batarang, and he destroyed the giant mind reading chamber, and now Riddler is getting a mental overload. And of course now Robin and Chase Meridian fall to their deaths. But, you know, we all know he's going to be able to save both of them. But Batman's going to have to disobey the laws of physics. Oh, so here's how it happens. They both just happen to fall down the same spike-ridden tunnel. So this scene right here is ridiculous. But as I mentioned before, Elliot Goldenthal's, like, grand operatic stuff, his music, it kind of saves the scene. It makes it somewhat redeemable, and I mean somewhat. Like, I would listen to this stuff on my own, but, you know, gotta give Joel Schumacher props for hiring him. And we have one final confrontation with Two-Face. And they bring up the coin, which really hasn't been a prominent thing in Harvey's character up until now. It's been more of a toy, and what Batman does is he throws a bunch of coins into the air to put Harvey into a panic. And then in the scramble to grab the right coin, Two-Face, he falls to his death into the spikes. And Robin never gets his revenge, but he's like, well, justice happened. And now they're going to go see the Riddler. And his mind is melted, and he has this fever dream of Batman approaching him as like a giant bat. And I gotta say, this is one of the instances where we get to see a glimpse of a more grounded performance from Edward Nygma as he's like just losing it. This is kind of like the last moment where we get to see what the movie could have looked like. And for the first time, we get to see Arkham Asylum in any sort of cinematic iteration. And we have a doctor who's basically just supposed to look like Tim Burton. So, again, don't know if it's a bleep you or a homage. And this is the kind of environment that Chase Meridian should have been introduced in. But, again, we got to sell Nicole Kidman's hotness in the 90s back. It really is interesting how far superhero movies have come along since then. They don't seem like a gamble nowadays, but back then that was the case. So presumably, Edward Nygma is alive, and he's just not mentioned in the next Batman movie, but it does make you wonder, what if? I'm really curious, what would this movie have been like had, Nicole Kidman's character just not been in it? But I guess, we needed a hot chick for Bruce Wayne to pursue. So, the funny thing is, it isn't until, the fourth movie where they're like, we don't really need a girl for him to be interested in. And I gotta say, it took him that long to figure out. And Batman and Robin are running into the distance, backlit by the bat signal. And for whatever reason, Batman's ears are really jiggly. And just like that, the movie is done. Well, there's $3.99 on YouTube down the drain, and so it wasn't bad. Wasn't great, but it just kind of goes to show you where we were with superhero movies in the 90s. People didn't take them seriously. And it is just such a shame. It kind of took Marvel with Blade and X-Men and then Spider-Man to let people know, okay, we can do this really, really well and we don't have to sell out on it. But, again, this was the 90s. And so it's a shame when we think of what we could have had and so much sooner. But I could have thought of a zillion other ways I could have wasted my time. So, I don't know. I guess, Joel Schumacher, this movie wasn't entirely your fault. And you gave it your best shot. And you proved throughout several other cinematic endeavors that you were a force to be reckoned with. So rest in peace and thanks for the flick. Have a good one.